At my father's funeral, my sister, who stole my fiancé 5 years ago, flaunted her diamonds. "And you're still broke." I calmly called my husband over. When my sister saw him, she turned pale, because it was. The rain hammered against the funeral home windows as I watched Victoria adjust her massive diamond earrings for the third time in 10 minutes. Even at our father's funeral, she couldn't resist showing off. Her black Versace dress probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and those diamonds, well, they were probably Tyler's latest guilt gift. My sister had always been beautiful, manipulative, and utterly heartless, but seeing her preen at Dad's casket made my stomach turn. She caught me staring and smirked. "Oh, Emma, you look tired. Still working at that little nonprofit?" Her voice dripped with fake concern. I smoothed my simple black dress, elegant, but clearly not designer. "Someone has to help people who actually need it, Victoria." She laughed, the sound echoing inappropriately in the solemn space. "Still playing saint, I see. While you're saving the world for pennies, some of us have learned how to live well." She gestured to her jewelry with theatrical flair. "Tyler bought me these last week, just because." The mention of Tyler's name hit like it always did, a sharp reminder of the worst betrayal of my life. 5 years ago, Tyler Brooks had been mine. We'd been engaged for 8 months, planning our summer wedding, when Victoria swooped in like a vulture. I remember that awful night when I found them together in Tyler's apartment, her lipstick smeared across his mouth, my engagement ring sitting abandoned on his kitchen counter. "Emma, I can explain." Tyler had stammered, but Victoria just smiled triumphantly. "Some women are meant for bigger things, Emma. Tyler deserves someone who can match his ambitions." She'd been right about one thing: Tyler was ambitious. His family owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across Illinois, and he'd inherited his father's business sense, along with his wandering eye. What I hadn't realized then was that Victoria saw Tyler as her ticket to the lifestyle she'd always craved. She'd seduced him systematically, calculatedly, like a predator stalking prey. The worst part? She'd pretended to comfort me through our father's first health scare while planning her move behind my back. After that devastating night, I'd fallen apart completely. The nonprofit where I worked as a program coordinator barely paid enough to cover my studio apartment rent, and without Tyler's financial support, I'd struggled to make ends meet. Victoria had moved into Tyler's mansion within a month, posting endless social media photos of their glamorous life together. Charity galas, weekend trips to the Hamptons, designer shopping sprees, she documented every moment of the life she'd stolen from me. Meanwhile, I was eating ramen noodles for dinner and crying myself to sleep on a futon mattress. My coworkers pitied me, my few friends didn't know what to say, and my father, already battling his own wellness concerns, watched helplessly as his youngest daughter spiraled into depression. "She'll get what's coming to her," Dad used to say during our weekly coffee dates. "People like Victoria always do." I'd wanted to believe him, but watching her thrive while I barely survived felt like proof that sometimes the bad guys really do win. That was before I met Alexander Sterling at a fundraising gala 2 years later. Alexander appeared in my life like something out of a fairy tale, though I was too broken to recognize it at first. I was working the registration table at a charity auction for underprivileged children when this tall, distinguished man in an impeccably tailored suit approached. "Emma Collins?" he'd asked, checking his invitation. "I believe I'm at your table tonight." I looked up into the warmest brown eyes I'd ever seen, framed by silver-touched temples that made him look like a movie star. Alexander Sterling. I recognized the name from the donor list. Sterling Enterprises was one of Chicago's most successful venture capital firms, and Alexander was known for his philanthropy as much as his business acumen. "You're not what I expected," he said with a gentle smile. "Most nonprofit coordinators don't look like they stepped off a magazine cover." I'd laughed for the first time in months. "You clearly haven't met many nonprofit coordinators. We're a surprisingly glamorous bunch when we're not covered in paint from community center renovations." That night, we talked until the venue staff started stacking chairs around us. Alexander pursued me with the patience of a man who understood trauma. He never pushed, never demanded more than I could give, and slowly helped me rebuild my shattered confidence. Our first official date was at a small Italian restaurant where he asked thoughtful questions about my work and listened like my answers actually mattered. When I mentioned my passion for education reform, his eyes lit up. "My foundation focuses on inner-city schools," he said. "We should collaborate." It wasn't a line. He genuinely believed in the causes I cared about. Within 6 months, he'd helped me launch an entirely new program connecting at-risk youth with mentorship opportunities. The funding came from his personal foundation, but he insisted I take full credit for the program design. "You're the visionary, Emma. I'm just the guy with the checkbook." Alexander never made me feel small or inadequate the way Tyler had. Instead, he saw potential I'd forgotten I possessed and helped me nurture it back to life. When he proposed 18 months later, it was during a quiet moment at one of our schools, surrounded by the children we'd helped together. Our wedding was everything Tyler and I had planned, but better, intimate, meaningful, focused on love rather than show. Alexander's connections in Chicago's philanthropic circles meant our reception was attended by some of the city's most influential people, but he made sure the focus stayed on us and our commitment to each other. Victoria wasn't invited, obviously, though I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd been furious about the marriage announcement in the Chicago Tribune's society pages. Emma married some old rich guy for his money. She'd reportedly told anyone who'd listen. I always knew she'd end up as someone's trophy wife. The irony was delicious. Victoria, who'd literally stolen another woman's fiancé for financial security, accusing me of being a gold digger, but I was too happy to care about her bitterness. Alexander and I honeymooned in Tuscany, where he surprised me by purchasing a small villa for our anniversaries, he explained. "And whenever you need to remember that you deserve beautiful things, under the Italian sun, surrounded by vineyards and history, I finally felt like myself again, stronger, more confident, genuinely loved." The past 2 years of marriage had transformed my entire world. Alexander didn't just love me, he believed in me with an intensity that was both humbling and empowering. When I mentioned wanting to expand our youth programs nationally, he didn't just nod supportively, he helped me write a business plan and connected me with investors. When I worried about being just a non-profit worker compared to his business associates' wives, he reminded me that changing lives was the most important work anyone could do. "You're not my accessory, Emma," he'd say firmly. "You're my partner in everything that matters." Our foundation now operated in 12 states, and I'd been featured on the cover of Nonprofit Leadership magazine. The scared, broken woman Tyler had discarded was gone, replaced by someone who commanded respect in boardrooms and conference halls. Alexander attended every one of my speaking engagements, beaming with pride from the audience. His support had given me wings I'd never known I possessed. But Victoria had no idea about any of this. We'd maintained complete silence since Tyler's betrayal. Dad's decline had been swift and heartbreaking. The proud man who'd raised 2 daughters alone after Mom died had withered away in just 6 months. Victoria visited him exactly twice during his final illness, both times to ask about his will. I'd been there every day, holding his hand through medical treatments and reading him news articles about our foundation's latest successes. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart," he'd whispered during one of our last conversations. "You turned that pain into purpose. That's what real strength looks like." He'd made me promise to be civil to Victoria at the funeral. "She's still your sister," he'd said weakly. "Family is complicated, but it's still family." I'd agreed, though privately I doubted Victoria would make civility easy. True to form, she'd arrived at the funeral home like she was attending a cocktail party, making dramatic entrances and holding court with distant relatives who remembered her as the successful daughter. She'd barely glanced at Dad's casket, too busy networking and showing off her latest jewelry. Watching her perform reminded me why I'd kept my marriage private. Victoria turned everything into a competition. "You know, Emma," Victoria continued, adjusting her diamond bracelet with deliberate slowness, "I saw your little newsletter article about that school program. How sweet that you're still playing with children while the rest of us handle real careers. Several relatives had gathered around us, and I could see them watching our interaction with uncomfortable fascination. This was vintage Victoria creating a public scene where I'd look petty if I defended myself. Some people measure success differently than others, I replied quietly, refusing to take the bait. She laughed, the sound sharp and cutting. Oh please, success is success, honey. These diamonds didn't buy themselves. She held up her wrist so the bracelet caught the light. Tyler just closed another dealership deal. We're thinking of buying a house in the Hamptons. What are you thinking of buying? Oh wait. Her smile turned vicious. You probably can't afford to think about buying anything meaningful. The relative shifted uncomfortably, and I felt that familiar burn of humiliation rising in my chest. But then, I remembered Alexander's words from that morning. You don't need to prove anything to anyone, especially her. I took a deep breath and smiled calmly. Actually, Victoria, I'd like you to meet someone. I turned toward the entrance where Alexander had just appeared, having finished parking the car. Even from across the room, his presence commanded attention, the confident stride, the perfectly tailored charcoal suit, the aura of quiet authority that successful people carry without effort. He spotted me immediately and began walking over, his warm smile cutting through the funeral home's somber atmosphere. My husband was just finishing up a conference call with some investors in New York. I said casually, watching Victoria's expression shift from smug confidence to confusion. Alexander runs Sterling Enterprises. Maybe you've heard of it? Victoria's face went white. Of course she'd heard of Sterling Enterprises. Every business section reader in Chicago knew that name. Alexander Sterling was featured regularly in Forbes and Fortune, profiled as one of the Midwest's most influential venture capitalists. His company had backed some of the biggest startup successes of the past decade. Alexander, darling, I called out, my voice carrying across the quiet room. Come meet my sister Victoria. Alexander approached us with that easy confidence I'd fallen in love with, immediately reading the tension in the room, but maintaining his gracious demeanor. Victoria, he said warmly, extending his hand. Emma's told me so much about you. I'm Alexander Sterling. Victoria stared at his outstretched hand like it might bite her, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The relatives around us had gone completely quiet, sensing something significant was happening. I watched my sister's mind racing, trying to process this impossible development. Emma, boring, broke, unsuccessful Emma, was married to one of Chicago's most eligible bachelors? The man whose company had been profiled in last month's Business Weekly? Whose philanthropic foundation had donated millions to various causes? You're Emma's husband? Victoria finally managed to stammer. Alexander wrapped his arm around my waist with casual intimacy. 3 wonderful years together, 2 of them married. Emma's work with at-risk youth is what brought us together initially. Her passion for education reform is absolutely inspiring. He beamed at me with genuine adoration. She's expanding our foundation's programs to the West Coast next year. The color drained completely from Victoria's face as the implications hit her. While she'd been playing trophy wife to a car dealership owner, I'd married into Chicago's elite philanthropic circles. While she'd been shopping for jewelry with Tyler's money, I'd been building a national nonprofit empire with my husband's support and resources. The diamonds she'd been flaunting suddenly looked gaudy and desperate compared to the understated elegance of my simple wedding ring, a flawless 3-carat stone that Alexander had chosen because it's beautiful. Without being showy, just like you, Emma never mentioned. Victoria started weakly. We prefer to keep our private life private, Alexander replied smoothly. Though I'm sure you've seen coverage of our foundation's work in the Tribune's charity section. Of course, she had Victoria read the society pages religiously, always checking to see who was donating what and attending which galas. She just hadn't connected those articles about the Sterling Foundation's education initiatives with her supposedly unsuccessful sister. The Hamptons house sounds lovely, I said conversationally. We have a place in Martha's Vineyard, but honestly, we spend most summers at our villa in Tuscany. Victoria's jewelry suddenly looked less impressive as she realized the magnitude of her miscalculation. Tyler's car dealership money was substantial by normal standards, but Alexander's venture capital fortune was in an entirely different league. While she'd been playing the part of a rich man's wife, I'd become an actual partner to someone whose influence extended far beyond regional business circles. Emma's being modest, Alexander continued, his pride in me evident to everyone watching. Her youth mentorship program was just nominated for a National Education Award. Harvard's Kennedy School wants her to speak at their public policy conference next month. I felt a familiar flutter of joy at his support. Alexander never missed an opportunity to highlight my achievements, even in casual conversation. Victoria, meanwhile, looked like she might be ill. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the shock and envy warring across her features. That's wonderful," she managed to choke out. The relatives who'd witnessed her earlier performance were exchanging meaningful glances, clearly enjoying this reversal of fortune. Tyler chose that exact moment to approach our group, probably wondering why his wife looked like she'd seen a ghost. Tyler Brooks looked exactly the same as he had 5 years ago, handsome in that bland, predictable way that had once made my heart race. His expensive suit and carefully styled hair screamed, "trying too hard," especially standing next to Alexander's effortless sophistication. "Emma," he said awkwardly, clearly uncertain about the protocol for greeting an ex-fiancé at her father's funeral. "I'm sorry for your loss. Your dad was a good man." His eyes kept darting between Alexander and me, trying to piece together this unexpected development. I'd fantasized about this moment during those dark months after our breakup, the chance to show Tyler what he'd lost. But standing there with Alexander's arm around me, I felt nothing but indifference toward my former fiancé. "Thank you, Tyler," I replied calmly. "Dad always spoke highly of you, even after everything." Victoria had found her voice again, desperation making her reckless. "Tyler, this is Emma's husband, Alexander Sterling, from Sterling Enterprises." She said the company name like it tasted bitter. Tyler's face went through several expressions: surprise, recognition, and finally, a kind of sick understanding of what he'd actually thrown away 5 years ago. The silence stretched uncomfortably as Tyler processed the full scope of his mistake. He'd traded me for Victoria, thinking he was upgrading to someone more ambitious and socially connected. Instead, he'd ended up with a beautiful but ultimately shallow woman whose main talent was spending his money, while I'd married someone whose influence and wealth made Tyler look like a small-town amateur. "Sterling Enterprises," Tyler repeated slowly. "You're the Alexander Sterling who just bought Henderson Tech for $300 million. Alexander nodded modestly. "Among other acquisitions, yes, though I'm much more interested in discussing Emma's work. She's transforming how we approach urban education policy." I watched Tyler's face as he realized the magnitude of his error. The woman he'd dismissed as not ambitious enough had not only found tremendous professional success, but had married into a level of wealth and influence he could never achieve. Victoria grabbed Tyler's arm possessively, her diamonds catching the light in what now seemed like a desperate display rather than a triumphant one. "We should probably go," she said quickly. "Emma, it was interesting seeing you again." But Alexander wasn't finished. "Actually, I'd love to hear about your car business, Tyler. Emma mentioned you two were engaged once. I always enjoy meeting people from my wife's past." Tyler's discomfort was palpable as he tried to explain his success to a man who'd built an empire that dwarfed anything he could imagine. "We have several locations across Illinois," he stammered. "Family business, you know." Alexander nodded politely. "That's wonderful. There's something to be said for traditional business models. Though I imagine Emma's nonprofit work has more long-term impact than either of our careers. She's literally changing children's lives every day." The praise made my heart soar, not because I needed validation, but because Alexander genuinely believed in the importance of my work. Tyler had always made me feel like my job was a hobby I'd eventually outgrow. Victoria couldn't stand watching her husband be diminished any longer. "Well, we really should go," she said sharply. "The reception at the country club won't wait." She was lying, there was no reception. I'd arranged a simple gathering at Dad's favorite restaurant for close family only, but Victoria needed an escape route that would let her salvage some dignity. "Of course," I said graciously. "Thank you both for coming. Dad would have appreciated it." As they turned to leave, Tyler looked back once, his expression a mixture of regret and disbelief. In that moment, I felt genuinely sorry for him. After they left, Alexander squeezed my hand gently. "Are you okay? That seemed intense." I looked around the funeral home where Dad's life was being celebrated. Surrounded by people who genuinely loved him, standing next to a man who cherished and supported me beyond my wildest dreams. "I'm perfect," I said honestly. "For the first time in years, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Later, at the real family gathering, several relatives approached me to apologize for Victoria's behavior and to express their amazement at how my life had turned out. "Your father was so proud of you," my aunt whispered. "He always said you had more strength than you realized." Driving home that night, Alexander reached over and took my hand. "I'm proud of how you handled that situation. You could have destroyed her, but you chose grace instead." I smiled, watching Chicago's skyline twinkle in the distance. Victoria destroyed herself the moment she chose cruelty over kindness. I just happened to find something better while she was busy gloating. Sometimes the best revenge isn't crushing your enemies, it's becoming so genuinely happy that their opinion becomes irrelevant. If you've ever had someone underestimate you, share your story in the comments. Success tastes sweetest when it's earned through authenticity, not spite.